The protests in the United States have shifted entirely into the political realm. The state of California has filed a lawsuit against the administration of American President Donald Trump over the deployment of the National Guard and the Marine Corps to suppress protests in Los Angeles. Let me remind you, Trump recently signed an additional order to send 2,000 more National Guardsmen in addition to the 2,000 who have already been deployed. And the United States Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, sent 700 Marines to Los Angeles. In this episode, together with you, we'll figure out exactly which laws and acts the state of California refers to in its lawsuit against Donald Trump. And how does Donald Trump respond to all of this? Because many analysts and experts from the United States of America openly say that now the outcome of the crisis in California depends on what Trump does next. Because he is clearly fueling the escalation. Let's figure this out together. I'm Pechy. It's June 10th today. Next, let's go through everything step by step. But before we start, I ask you to subscribe to this channel, give it a like, leave any comment you want, and be sure to subscribe to my Telegram channel, Pechy News. The link to it is in the description of this video. There, we publish breaking news as soon as it comes in. Let's go through everything step by step now. The state of California has officially filed a lawsuit against the administration of American President Donald Trump for sending the National Guard and the Marine Corps to Los Angeles. California Governor Gavin Newsom stated that such an operation was carried out without his consent, which violates the United States Constitution and federal law. The lawsuit states that there was no legal basis for intervention, there was neither an uprising nor a threat to state authority, and therefore Washington's actions are absolutely illegal. According to the law, the National Guard does not have the right to participate in civil law enforcement and can only protect federal agents and facilities. Therefore, California demands the immediate withdrawal of the military and the return of control over the Guard to the state governor. Meanwhile, United States President Donald Trump referred to a provision of federal law, Section 12,406 of the United States Code, which allows the National Guard to be called up in cases of insurrection or threat of insurrection. Large-scale protests against the White House's migration policy were called a form of rebellion by Trump, and he used this as a reason to bring in federal forces. That is, he is directly saying this is a rebellion, this is an insurrection, this is a threat to federal authority, so it's necessary to send in the National Guard and Marines to suppress this rebellion. The state of California states that there is no insurrection or suppression, these are protests. Accordingly, the decision to send in the National Guard was illegal. And Senator Jack Reed, the leading Democrat on the Senate Armed Services Committee, expressed deep concern about the actions of President Donald Trump, noting that he is seriously worried about the decision of the head of the White House. Not just about deploying the National Guard, but also about the Marines. This goes completely beyond any limits of using the military against one's own people. Well, let me quote this senator further. The president is using force to override the authority of the governor and the mayor, and is using the military as a political weapon. This unprecedented step threatens to turn a tense situation into a national crisis. Since the founding of our country, the American people have made it clear we do not want the military to carry out law enforcement actions on the territory of the United States of America. Well, here we also need to look at exactly what the state of California is referring to in its indictment. In the lawsuit of California against the Trump administration, two historical laws are mentioned. I'll now explain what is meant in these laws. So, the first law is the 10th Amendment. What is it? The amendment, ratified in 1791, establishes that any powers not specifically granted to the federal government and not taken from the states are reserved to those states or to the people. In other words, it means that such issues should be decided either by the state government or by the people of that state. This is absolutely not under federal government jurisdiction. Why was this amendment created? The amendment was intended, quote, to dispel fears that the new national government might attempt to exercise undelegated powers and that the states would not be able to fully exercise their reserved powers. According to the decision of the Supreme Court in the year 1940, In other words, it is intended to limit the scope of the federal government's influence and to protect the powers of the states. That is, it is a kind of balance between the power of the states and the federal government. How is this amendment being used in the lawsuit by the state of California against the administration of Donald Trump? The lawsuit claims that maintaining order and fighting crime are fundamental rights of the state, and that President Trump's mobilization of the National Guard violated the role of California Governor Gavin Newsom as the commander-in-chief of the state's National Guard. Although the president has the right to mobilize the National Guard, the lawsuit claims that the Guard was not properly federalized in this case, and that the administration violated California's sovereignty. The second law that the state of California refers to in its lawsuit against Trump is the Posse Comitatus Act. What is that? It's a law that was passed in 1878 after the end of the Reconstruction era. And it prohibits the use of the military to maintain law and order within the country unless it is expressly authorized by Congress or the Constitution. That means the military cannot perform law enforcement functions. Why was this law created? Former Confederate leaders who had returned to political power at that time created this act to prevent the use of federal military forces to enforce Reconstruction-era laws that protected emancipated African Americans. Thus, at that time, Congress was trying to prevent federal military interference in the establishment of Jim Crow laws in the former Confederate states. How is this law being used in California's lawsuit against Trump? The lawsuit cites the act, claiming that the use of the military to ensure internal order is reserved for extremely limited circumstances. The lawsuit claims the Trump administration is violating or will inevitably violate the act. Well, as you understand, both laws say that the military cannot be used for law enforcement functions unless the state itself or the public of that state requests it. And that Trump essentially took the authority away from the governor of California and the mayor of Los Angeles and assumed these functions entirely himself. Well, right now in the United States of America, people are saying that the development of events will depend on what steps Donald Trump takes next. And Trump's decision to deploy troops, despite opposition from California Governor Gavin Newsom, became the latest example of his willingness to exercise extraordinary executive power, often on questionable grounds. And it marked a break from his first term, when establishment officials often still managed to dissuade Trump from some extreme impulses. Now it's clear that advisors can't influence Trump. He makes such decisions himself. Well, in this situation, the top officials of Trump's administration are now throwing around words like insurrection, saying that there was a rebellion, an insurrection, so everything was legal. And it's not surprising that many observers saw such rhetoric as a sign that the White House was ready to actually apply the law on insurrection. This is a law that allows the president to deploy troops to suppress an insurrection in a state. The first step for this has already been taken. This is the National Guard, the Marines, and then the Army itself could come in with armored vehicles and start suppressing the uprising. As previously stated, there is no uprising in California. And Donald Trump's statement on Monday that his swift action stopped the destruction of Los Angeles does not correspond to any reality. Meanwhile, the so-called presidential border czar, that's what they call him, Tom Homan, stated that the claims by Democratic Party officials that the protests intensified precisely because Trump sent in the National Guard are laughable. And he stated the following: "It all depends on the actions of these protesters. I mean, they make decisions saying it's all up to the protesters, not the National Guard." On Monday evening, a really large number of protesters gathered in Los Angeles, which creates the threat of another wave of tension and uncertainty. And now the trajectory of this crisis may depend only on whether Trump continues these, theatrical antics, crossing boundaries that modern presidents generally don't even approach. Well, in particular, when it comes to the use of troops as law enforcement. On the other hand, you must understand that currently this image of mass unrest is actually very advantageous for Trump. That is, the more protests there are in those states where the governors and mayors are Democrats, the better it is for him. He shows that he is the one who can handle the situation, while the Democrats cannot do that. And the creation or escalation of a law and order crisis or a threat to public safety, and then using that to justify deploying the military on domestic territory, will reflect the methodology of authoritarian leaders, such as, for example, the dictator Putin. Well, at the end of this episode, I want to add that California has already filed 24 lawsuits against the administration of Donald Trump in just 5 months of his presidency. The governor of California, Gavin Newsom, obviously does not intend to give up. There are already rumors that he might actually be aiming for the presidency in the next presidential election, and that's why he definitely doesn't intend to give up. He states that it's absolutely reckless, pointless, and disrespectful to American troops to send Nazarbadia somewhere she shouldn't be. This confrontation has clearly shifted entirely into the political arena, where it will continue. Observers fear that Trump needs an image to justify sending troops not only to Los Angeles, but in general to those cities currently governed by Democrats, in order to undermine their power as much as possible, and as they say, to show that he is the king here and he can decide where to send whom and how to restore order. But I'll put an ellipsis here. Share your opinions and conclusions in the comments under this episode, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, and don't forget to like. If you want to support the work of this channel, you can do so financially with any donation. You can do this through the links and payment details in the video description or by using the on-screen quick response code. That's all for now. Take care. Goodbye, everyone.